I'm doing a weird face for the video, for the thumbnail. Hi everyone. Um, so this video has been a while in coming. It is very probably going to be complete gobshite because of how I have set up my camera. It's really on the most precarious thing because I wanted to, first of all, showcase the painting that I did, which this is on a fabric, this was my father's shawl. Um, it wasn't a shroud, but it was starting to look like a shroud, like it's a raw silk thing and sort of undyed, colorless thing. And I hung on to it because it belonged to him after he passed, but then it was looking kind of depressing, and I thought, oh, if I use it, I want something that doesn't remind me of like death. So I decided to paint it. Now, this may be like a Tibetan sand mandala, those patterns that they make and then sweep away, because I have used some unknown pigment which may run in the wash when I wash it. I have one friend that suggested that instead of washing it, you can just keep putting stuff out in the sun, which is something a sun worshipper would do, which is what he is. Anyway, I'm here to talk about Druidry again, because it's something that I keep coming back to as particularly fascinating to me, and I am sort of in the process of studying it formally. But also, like, there's something a bit weird going on online because I always search for like videos about it, and usually I get something inspiring about Druidry from historians. And Ronald Hutton is a beautiful orator, and but I always feel like there's this approach to academia which is so what's the word I'm looking for? It's this kind of like sterilized realism. So it's like the whole time they can sense the listener's inspiration and flights of fancy, as if their flights of fancy are these dogs that are straining against the leash, and the teacher or the professor has to kind of disabuse them of any possible flight of fancy in advance of the lecture, to the extent where I was just watching a video. The whole reason I'm doing this video, I should be in bed, and I was going to be in bed, and I have been too lazy to make this video for many, many weeks, even though this was ready. But I got irritated, and then I almost wrote like a hate comment, and then I was like, why don't you just like channel it into something positive and talk about what you want to talk about rather than like slagging off some poor historian. So the weird thing that I find with the way people talk about Druids, yes, we know, like but you don't need to talk for an hour about the fact that the only historical record we have about Druids is from Julius Caesar. Actually, this guy had someone else, who I hadn't heard of, which is kind of interesting. But he's like, he would give us a piece of, I'm not going to say who he is, but he would give us like a piece of historical record, and then he would debunk it, and then he would give us another piece of like basically any kind of literature where Druids were mentioned, whether you call that historical record or not. But he kept kind of feeding these tidbits and then debunking them, and feeding another tidbit and then debunking it. And it was almost like, I almost felt like a little kid who was being offered candy, and then the person was throwing it into the bin. Like, no, you can't have it. Which is maybe somewhat indicative of my state of mind when I am talking about Druidry or studying Druidry like a little kid waiting for candy, very excited and naive. But it's almost like they're very, a lot of these historians I've heard are very, very um, vociferous in painting neo-paganism as extremely misguided and even harmful in their approach to the historical record because they're so fanciful and so overly enthusiastic. And then also he'll say like, and wherever, the historians will say wherever there has not been um, any historical evidence, they have invented the evidence. Um, and the funny thing is, like, they're offended by that. They're so offended by the fact that people brought their inspiration to the narrative as if it's sacrilegious, which is kind of like, to me, it's belying what they're professing to do, which is to present the facts. So it's like they're saying, okay, Druidry is not this and not this and not this, and then you're like, okay, so what is it? And then, well, we don't know. So then you don't really know that it's not that. like, um, and I mean, of course, like obviously, the chances of it being that when it could be anything else as well is sort of slim. But it's almost like that they want to say, I don't know. I feel like I'm being herded back into Christianity by these people sometimes. Like, not back into Christianity because I've never been Christian, but I feel like that the only kind of like they're so sort of dismissive of paganism and then I don't know. I was listening to. I actually was really hoping that he had some Greek sources that were sort of valid, because we have Julius Caesar, and then there's like a couple of mentions from Greek sources, and Pliny the Elder is extremely um, maligned by historians. Uh, fairly or unfairly is up to you, but definitely the man thought that people in India had three legs or sometimes one leg. So he was out there. So you can maybe then he was wrong about mistletoe and whatnot with the Druids. I think that's where the historians are going with that. But it's like they want you to throw it all out then, and it's kind of like I get mad about that with I was about to say Robertson Davies, not Robertson Davies, Robert Graves, um, because like in my household, the White Goddess and the Golden Bough, my parents kind of took them seriously, which is strange because I believe that the White Goddess in particular was called out in its own time. Like as soon as it was published, there were historians and theologists, anthropologists. I don't know who would actually be the highest ranking expert to assert, to presume to debunk his work, but there was an outcry immediately, and somehow or other, my parents didn't hear the outcry because they took Robert Graves quite seriously, and the White Goddess was, I mean, it wasn't gospel, but it was considered definitely a must read if you were interested in uh, ancient traditions and ancient spirituality. And same with the Golden Bough, who the author, I cannot remember who it was, but I think it's important to point out the problems with the research. But the thing with Robert Graves is they just threw the whole thing out. Okay, the whole book is cancelled, and it's like, well, I want to know first of all, why did he think that stuff? That he thought like this pan-European goddess religion. Like, what was that based on? Was that just his own fancy? Or did he have evidence in front of him that he interpreted one way and then other historians wouldn't interpret it that way? And the other thing is, I'm getting the feeling that I'm quite like incomprehensible right now. So if I'm not making any sense, I apologize. But just enjoy the backdrop. But yeah, like and I also want to know what leads them to the conclusion that it was fanciful. Like when they want to debunk stuff. So I think it's important to point out the problems with it, but I think it's also important to present the information, not just like, which to be fair, these historians kind of do, but I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of derision in their tone and anger, but maybe I'm projecting that. But I guess like as pagans, even neo-pagans, which is such a sort of apologetic term, but anyway, like we're very sensitive um, to criticism, I guess, because of the being sort of, persecuted and then invisibilized. I mean, it wasn't us personally, but like this whole polytheistic, mystical tradition was. Yeah, now I'm definitely off on a tangent. Because obviously, like, pagans in their own time did not identify as pagans. The Anglo-Saxons were the Anglo-Saxons and the Celts were the Celts, and Hellenic paganism was a different thing. So it's not like they were all like, oh, we're pagans and soon Christians will come and they'll be so annoying. And, they didn't have that kind of like identity thing. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, basically all I'm saying is that like it reminds me a bit of Christian derision toward paganism the way that historians are derisive about this kind of fanciful thing. And although I have to say, somebody like I heard Ronald Hutton talking about, because he's done this book about the wild queens, I think it's called something like that. And one of the things that he talks about, kind of in order to dismiss it, is the tendency in the what I still call the Dark Ages, because I like the term. So like the first millennium, maybe like 500 AD, modern era, um, common era. Sorry, it's common era. There was this sort of trend. It was like this thing that rural people got into where they would try to summon Diana. And in the church records, it was called that they were trying to summon Diana, but it's not really clear whether they were using the the Roman goddess name, Diana, but they would try. There was supposedly this wild hunt going on where Diana was roaming around with wild animals at night, flying through the sky, and people would, and she was looking for revelers to join, and people would try to join her and have some kind of ecstatic experience with Diana. And Ronald Hutton was saying, like, it looks pagan, but it's not really, because the people who were practicing that were not identifying as pagan, although the church looked at it with a side eye, like, we have to stop this. This is not Christian. But Ronald Hutton's point was like they weren't self-identifying as pagan. Now, I mean, neither were pre-Christian Saxons either. Like the word pagan is already a sort of concoction. Anyway, so then somebody else, I can't remember who else. There was this other guy who was talking about it. Oh, it was the Esoterica channel. He was talking about the same phenomenon. But he actually gave like one account, which was maybe in Ronald Hutton's book as well. I don't know, because I don't have it. But this woman in I think it was Switzerland or Austria, she had tried to summon Diana, and she had taken this like huge bread kneading basin into the courtyard and then put it on the back of a, it says bitch, so I'm assuming that's like a dog, or two, on the back of two dogs, and then sat in it, and then took belladonna, I think, which is poison, but also, hallucinogen, and then had a seizure. But in her mind, she was flying with Diana, um, and that the esoterica guy was admonishing us not to try it. Now, obviously, I'm not going to take belladonna, but I would like to try. Oh no, that's not really fair on the dogs though, because they didn't sign up for that. But it's interesting actually, and they were saying, they were kind of dismissing it. Well, there's no connection with Diana. Well, apart from the dogs though, and the fact that they were two female dogs, because Diana is Artemis is this like exclusively female, feminine goddess who kept hounds. I mean that was how she kept men away, was to set the hounds on them. So I don't know. It's intriguing. I don't see no connection. I see some connection. I do. Anyway. Druids, yes. So, what do I want to say about Druids? Oh, so this is my manifestation thing that I want to happen. I want them to dig up some archaeological evidence of a Druid in Switzerland, because the Helvetii have sat out this whole Druid argument, which has been going on for decades. And I feel like it's time for the Helvetii to make an appearance. Because in Caesar's account, they're just sort of wiped out en route to deal with Gaul. And I think that nobody's really looked at that kind of Swiss angle. Like, I think it would be interesting, and it would turn everything on its head, and I think it needs to be turned on its head, because I agree with Stephen Fry. Like right now, we've debunked a whole bunch of stuff that everyone believed like 30 years ago or 40 years ago, and now we think very smugly that we're right about what we think we know now, and very possibly, very probably, in fact, almost surely, everything that we think now will be debunked in 20 or 30 years, and it'll be a whole different reality. So anyway, Helvetii. Yes, Swiss Druid. So I'm concocting a drawing in my mind. I'm going to do like a Helvetii Druid. Draw one. That would be fun to do. I keep seeing winged helmets in my head, which is annoying, because that is the most ridiculous thing. Like I don't think anyone in the Bronze Age or the Iron Age had actually winged helmets. That was just like a comic book thing. But somehow it's a little bit stuck in my head now, especially thinking about the Helvetii. Anyway, I don't even think Druids should have helmets. They dug up that thing in Kent, and then, they were like, oh, it's a Druid with a ceremonial helmet. And they were like, can't be anything else because it can't stop an arrow because it's open on the top. It's like, well, a chieftain could wear that, Anyway. I've talked about that before, and I'm going because really all I wanted to do was show you the it's not a wall hanging, but the painting, fabric painting. All right, bye, you guys.